Vengeful Honor by Nick Kime. Orcs still rampaged over Armageddon Secundus, far off in the wastes or embedded deep in the bowels of the hive city they had taken. The guttural shouts and challenges of Thraka's hordes carried on a hot breeze. Reeking of ash and ripe with the stench of burning meat, the distant ruckus soon faded into obscurity, though, as ubiquitous as the wind, in the shadow of the Diablo Mountains and the Camp Fortis. Ballack knew a combat blade's monomolecular edge needed little sharpening, but considered it a ritual. A space marine seldom slept, ate, or drank. His every thought and deed bent towards being a better warrior, stronger, tougher, deadlier. Of late, Ballack had felt his transhuman prowess ebbing. A deep wound inflicted during an honourless duel had healed poorly. Perhaps it was karmic. His was the dirty blow, ending the duel but earning an injury in return. It had left his skin knotted and scarred. The flesh was tight and the muscles stiff. It had diminished him. His brothers knew it, and they would not tolerate his weakness. Not for long. Not in the Marines Malevolent, as part of the elite vilifiers. Ballack thought he heard Castor training nearby. He wondered if his captain had Narlek or Vathed in the ring with him. Or perhaps he had found a warrior from another chapter to hone his skills against. There were many Adeptus Astartes on this dirty world. Not all considered allies by the Malevolence. There was no sparring cage as such. Only billet tents remained. Basically all that was left of Armageddon in the region still held by Imperial forces. From Hades, more a burning crater than a hive city now, the vilifiers had moved on, seeking further battles. Orders to advance further east to secure the Amenities Bridge had stalled, while secondary and tertiary battle companies could be mustered. Castor reckoned on the Black Templars being a part of those forces.
That should be interesting,
Ballack had thought at the time. The Crusading Sons of Dawn were one of those chapters who might be considered antagonistic to the Malevolence. His ritual, not limited to his combat blade, Ballack had unsheathed and broken down a veritable arsenal. It sat on a rough blanket in front of him. A chain sword, several teeth detached from the belt, awaiting reintroduction. Bolt pistol, clip, and shells exposed. Firing mechanism pulled out and in need of oiling. Bolter, same as pistol. With the iron sights also removed, an underslung grenade launcher separated from the main body. Grenade belt and all frags looped from the bandolier. Cleaning, lapping, oiling, efficiency check, reassembly, and then recheck, followed by live fire with the exception of grenades. A warrior was only as effective as his weapon he wielded. For Ballack, he needed each and every one to be its optimum efficiency. His tools of war might be well worn, like the patchwork armour that was lying next to his weapons. Might, but they were always combat ready. The last blade was his by dint of theft, as was part of the war plate now repainted in the yellow and black livery of the Marines Malevolent. A huge double-handed sword with a concomitant power core that could energize the blade, set apart from the rest of its trappings. The hilt and quillions betrayed its provenance. Black Templars. Despite its obvious superiority to every other weapon Ballack possessed, it had remained in its sheath.
Are you ever going to draw that?
Ballack looked up from honing the combat blade.
I assumed it was you I heard sparring, brother captain.
Castor stepped into the half-shelled ruins that had recently been regaled with an imperial flag and Aquila standard. It had been municipal hall or a temple, or something that had ceased to have any meaning or usefulness since the war.
Vathed. Pity. I hoped he'd be up against your sword. Perhaps have a half length of it jutting from his abdomen.
Castor smiled coldly. He knew of the enmity between the Vilifire's rawest recruit and its oldest veteran.
What are you doing, Ballack? Trying to compensate for the fact you've lost your edge?
Ballack felt his jaw tense and had to fight to unclench his teeth and fists. He straightened up, despising himself for grimacing from the pain and the weakness it betrayed.
An old dog can still bite, even one without all its teeth.
Ballack realized he had his combat blade in his hand and made a conscious effort to lower it so he would look less confrontational.
I have teeth. And the sword, is that why it remains undrawn? Because you want to show your teeth?
I don't need a crutch, if that's what you're suggesting. I keep it sheathed because it's a trophy, and I have no need for a cutting sword almost as tall as I am. It doesn't suit me. Ballack was lean and wiry for a space marine. In the light of the buzzing sodium lamp he was working by, his face appeared gaunt and pale, unarmoured, exposing the neural ports in his mesh that sat beneath his battle plate. He was almost a head shorter than Castor. His grip tightened around the combat blade.
Have you come to thin the herd, Castor? Are you making way for my replacement?
Castor was about to leave, but shook his head before stepping back into the shadows.
Just seeing if you still had teeth, brother. The orcs beckon us again soon. I want to know all the Vilifiers can pull their weight. If you're not going to use the sword, though, get rid of it. We've had enough enemies here without further goading the Black Templars. The armor is one thing, that's just repurposing. But keeping trophies as if they're a foe we've vanquished, not wise.
Ballack watched him go and felt a few more grains trickle through the neck of his hourglass. 3 decades he had been a Vilifier, and a Malevolent longer than that. He supposed war ground everyone down eventually, even transhuman space marines. He wouldn't sleep. None of them would. Let the guards slumber. The mortals needed their rest. Ballack felt like doing anything but sleeping. He was restive, angry. After he finished stripping down and reassembling his weapons, he decided to walk to the edge of the camp. Despite what the flag and standard boasted, the ruins were not really Imperial territory. In war, ownership was ephemeral. It could shift as suddenly as a riptide and drown the complacent and ill-prepared in blood. Ballack wore his armour, even the dented shoulder guard where a greenskin had tried to take a bite out of it, the teeth marks extending as high as his gorget. Any harder or longer in the vice of the orc's jaw, and it would have been his neck. Too close. He'd left most of his weapons behind, taking the combat blade and pistol because they were light. They made room for the heavy Templar sword. Castor had been right. Parading trophies from supposed allies attracted undue attention. Such concerns had never been his to worry about. Perhaps his morbid thoughts about his own mortality had caused them to stir. A makeshift graveyard lay not far from the camp's border, too grim and demoralizing to be within sight of conscripts, and not so far the orcs could defile it without reprisal. It wasn't much, a scrap of earth decorated with broken swords, or the stock of a lasgun, rammed barrel first into the ground as a marker. Chains of ident tags wrapped around them. Ballack felt nothing as he walked amongst the memorials. Grief was for the weak. He would bury the sword amongst the anonymity of the graves, just another hollow monument. He had half unsheathed the blade, exposing some of the ornate filigree, when a grim voice called for his attention.
Malevolent!
Flat, declarative, but with a mote of arrogance they all carried. Ballack turned, one hand on the grip of his bolt pistol, but let go when he saw the two warriors had already drawn down on him. Inwardly, Ballack cursed. Black Templars. Even worse was that they knew him.
Vorda. Magellan.
He nodded cordially to the pair of sword brethren. The title was misleading. They didn't just use swords. Vorda had an axe, Magellan a mace. It was their old sergeant, Tiamat, who had carried the sword, the same one that Ballack had been out to ram into the ground and then forget. Vorda levelled his axe blade in challenge, so posturing and needlessly demonstrative. Ballack wondered if every verbal exchange between Templars was conducted in so formal a manner.
Do you remember what I said to you when we last met, Malevolent?
Vorda asked, snarling.
Your exact words? Vorda scowled.
Don't make me gut you where you stand, whore's son. I have a debt, a levy against my honour. The markings on Vorda's war plate suggested he had been promoted in Tiamat's stead. Ballack could not imagine how excruciating that must be for him. The guilt, allied to a deep sense of martial pride, so ambivalent. He would have laughed out loud had he not believed the two sword brethren would have cut him down for his impudence. Instead, he held up his hands. Will you beg for your life, dog? Snapped Magellan. It speaks, thought Ballack, but again chose wisely not to voice his inner monologues. You are the second person this night to compare me to a dog.
An apt description,
Magellan growled. Ballack addressed Vorda.
You said, when we meet again, and we will, there will be no duel, no quarter given. Does slaying a fellow warrior unarmed in cold blood satisfy that pledge, sword brethren?
Vorda smiled. Neither Templar wore his helm, presumably so Ballack could see the cold fury in their eyes, or the righteous indignation. A black crusader cross marked their noble faces, a demonstration of their ardent fealty.
I won't kill you here amongst the honoured dead.
He gestured to the blade.
Keep that. You might need it.
Ballack raised one eyebrow.
For what exactly? Our jewel, and Tiamat's sword, the prize. And if I refuse?
Magellan racked the side of his bolt pistol. Ballack nodded, approving of the strong-arm tactics.
I see.
Vorda's eyes narrowed. He can see I'm wounded, thought Ballack. He must have known Tiamat's blade cut deep.
And if I triumph?
Asked Ballack.
What is to stop you from sending another one of your vengeful brothers after me? You won't.
Ballack frowned.
You mean, we won't. Triumph,
declared Vorda with cold finality.
But should some miracle take place, you have our word that this will be the end of it.
Ballack jerked his head at Magellan.
That goes for him too, doesn't it?
Magellan took a step forward, but a glare from Vorda stopped him going any further.
You will be unarmoured when Vorda's blade strikes you dead.
He snarled, but then relented.
But I'll abide by my brother's word. See that rise?
Said Vorda, gesturing to a distant hill with his axe.
You have an hour. Come alone, or my brethren will erase you and your kind from existence. No seconds?
Ballack was looking at Magellan, who, despite what he had said, didn't seem wholly on board with the plan. Vorda was adamant, however.
Just you and I, to the death.
Ballack shrugged, trying to hide his annoyance.
To the death.
The Templars departed, the armour clanking loudly in their wake, and Ballack watched them go until they were lost to shadow. He turned to regard the site Vorda had chosen. The hill had been a landing pad. Some of the auger towers and comm stations were still intact around it, but it had been bombed to the eye and back.
dense crater field surrounded and invaded by ruins had no use as a landing zone anymore. It would be just as fine as an arena. Far enough away that no prying eyes would intrude, close enough that it wasn't in the heart of Orc territory. Ballack considered returning to the camp for reinforcements, but that would only further imperil his standing with the vilifiers. Take another Templar's head, and that might garner him some respect. But in truth, he went alone, because he had something to prove to himself, that he still had teeth. By the time Ballack had gone back for his chain blade and reached the ruin hillside, it was deep into night hours. Dawn was still far off, and the darkling silhouettes of distant Orc warbands plagued the horizon. Set against a hazy shroud of flickering umber, the greenskins were burning again. They liked fire, or rather what it did to wood, metal, and flesh. But Ballack soon found himself in a crater-strewn landing field. Any bodies had been since removed or eaten, but the wreckage lay dormant. Glyphs had been cut into a skirt of the rock, delineating the largest of the craters. Orcs had been there, but there was no further spore as far as Ballack could see. He began to pace the large crater, getting a feel for it, how to stand, the slight incline to the north, the density of the gravel underfoot. Ballack was about to look at his helm's internal chrono when Vorda's voice from the darkness answered his unspoken question.
I am surprised,
he said. Ballack noted the sword brethren's axe already in his gauntleted grip.
And alone also.
Vorda stepped forwards, in the meagre light of the halogen strip array that flickered intermittently but still had power.
You had me watched?
Asked Ballack.
Not very noble. Neither are you.
Ballack conceded to the point with a curt nod. Both warriors were under 50 paces apart, as they circled one another like stalking wolves. The distance shrank.
Is this about honor for you, or something else, Vorda?
Ballack asked, keenly appraising the Black Templars' movement, the way he held his blade, his stance as he shifted. Ballack went on, the circle ever tightened between them.
If you want revenge, you could have just shot me dead at the graveyard. I want you dead,
Vorda told him.
But I want to beat you first.
Said Ballack, understanding.
It's pride.
Tiamed had been an exceptional swordsman. Ballack was just some wretch who had cut him down ingloriously, through a twist of fate rather than skill. Vorda needed to prove the truth he felt in his heart, and not the lie he believed in his head, that Tiamed had been bested by a superior fighter. A snarl came from behind Vorda's faceplate before he spat a reply.
Draw my brother's sword, so I can wrest it from your dead grasp.
Ballack unsheathed the Templar blade, admiring the craft before jamming it into the earth.
I am a more brutal creature.
Vorda's sneer came through in his tone.
You are unworthy of it. I cannot deny that,
Ballack said, reaching over his shoulder to pull the chainsword from its maglock on his back.
Shall we begin?
Vorda nodded, lowering his axe blade so it jutted at the Malevolent like an accusation or a challenge. Thumbing the ignition stud, Ballack felt the satisfying churn of blades. About to engage him, he stopped at Vorda's upraised hand. Ballack frowned behind his blunt faceplate.
Is this supposed to be guile, Templar?
Vorda half turned towards something that he'd seen in the shadows. A shot rang out, dense, loud, and rippling the air. Vorda staggered, struck in the chest. He roared, but the answering gunfire eclipsed his fury. The muzzle flashes lit up the dark, kicking out solid slugs that took the Templar in the thigh, chest, and shoulder. He grunted.
Orcs!
And fell, wounded. Ballack was moving, forgetting Vorda, to engage the beast emerging from the gloom, hulking, tusked.
porcine brutes. Their leathered flesh was almost black, not green. Heavy shell fire detonated against Ballack's right knee, shattering armor plate and cracking bone. He sank down to one knee, just a few strides from where Vorda had collapsed. 3 more shots hit the Templar. The blood splatter reached Ballack's warplate and staining it. The axe hitting the ground rang out like a death knell. Ballack had only just struggled to his feet, spitting and cursing profusely as a second fat shell ripped through his shoulder guard and tore a piece of his breastplate. His stunned fingers released the chainsword, which chewed and growled in empathy with its former wielder as it lay prone in the crater's blood-flecked earth. His retinal feed told him he was wounded. Ballack's biosigns turned amber just before he got his helmet wrenched off. The orcs had done the same to Vorda too. Without the impediment of the helm, or perhaps because they were close enough for Ballack to smell their fetid breath, he realised their skin wasn't dark on its own. The orcs wore camouflage. He reached for his knife. A cold ring of metal pressed against his right temple stopped him.
No. Shadown. Move.
It spoke, halting, not in its own guttural dialect. It used Gothic. The greenskins could understand and converse in the Imperial tongue. It was an aberration that stoked the fires of Ballack's hatred, but since this war, little had surprised him about the orcs and what they were capable of. Up close, Ballack noticed they wore something approximating uniforms and had rank insignia. It had been planned. All of it. His preconditioned reflexes told him to fight, but his gut warned against it. Vorda was out cold and of little use. Ballack estimated 10 orcs from the stench. Subtle variations in grunts and their orientation all around him. All were armed, wearing heavy flat coats and well organised. They had been watching the landing field, seen the 2 warriors enter, and had waited until their attention was on each other to ambush them. The old wound flared, and evinced a grimace. Ballack had never felt so old. He heard the orcs arguing, somewhere out of sight, falling back into their crude native language. Ballack's eyes were on Vorda. If the orcs wanted them dead, they would already be dead. That meant one thing. They wanted captives, and that meant they were going to move them.
Well,
Ballack said, scowling.
let's get on with.
A savage blow shook his skull like a drum. Agony, then unconsciousness, stunted Ballack's tongue. Darkness came swift on its heels, filled with dreams of greenskins murmuring plans and uttering Thraka's name. As soon as Ballack awoke, he knew he was no longer in the crater. He was still kneeling, but now a thick iron chain shackled his ankles and wrists. Dank air assailed his nostrils. He could taste heat and warm metal on his tongue. The latter was blood. The former, he assumed, must be machinery of some kind. It was dark wherever they'd been taken, and closely confined. Quiet too. The almost subaural drone of ongoing war had receded to nothing. We were underground, he realised. Before opening his eyes, scarcely even breathing, Ballack listened. The snorting, grunting echoes coming back at him from further down what he assumed was a tunnel suggested the orcs were close. Their stench was far away enough though, so he opened his eyes. Vorda was watching him. Blood had caked around his left eye, where it pooled from a gash on his forehead. It made a mess of the Crusader's cross, but that was the least of his worries. Careful not to raise a clamour with his own chains, Vorda lifted a gauntleted finger to his lips. About 10 strides separated them. A distant glow emitting from orc-lit fires softened the gloom and gave it an orange cast. Ballack waited, his eyes on Vorda, who was now looking past the Malevolent to something behind him. After a few more moments, Vorda met his gaze again. He held up a splayed hand, then quickly clenched and unclenched it. 10 greenskins, as Ballack had suspected. He tapped 2 fingers on his lips, and Vorda nodded slowly.
So they took us?
Ballack whispered, careful to keep his voice low. Vorda nodded a second time.
Their overseers are not alone.
He hissed.
I've seen and heard dozens of diminutive greenskins scurrying around. They were digging. Not now, though.
Ballack replied, hearing only the muted conversation of the captors.
Whatever tunnel they've made is being filled. Smell that?
Over the orc stench, Ballack couldn't at first, but then he got a faint whiff of something. Fuels, oil, Visaline, promethium, all combustible.
Where are we?
He asked Vorda, carefully shifting around so he could look behind him. From the dead-end section they were chained in, the tunnel bent around at a sharp angle. Ballack saw bulky silhouettes, the errant flickers of fire.
West, I think,
said Vorda. Of the landing strip? That would bring them closer to Camp Fortis. The orcs were undermining, digging tunnels and lacing them with explosives. They meant to turn Camp Fortis into a sinkhole. Saboteurs. That explains why these greenskins were so organised. Orcs were beast, but they retained some form of structure. Ballack had fallen foul of their forward scouts, the vanguard. A large horde was coming, headed for Fortis. Bring down the camp, attack whilst it was in disarray. Ballack shuffled back around. Our weapons, he was about to ask, when he heard the tramp of booted feet behind him. The guttural laugh he heard as the orcs got close to him told him that whatever they had planned wasn't good.
St.
Vorda was glaring when Ballack turned back.
You and I are not done, Malevolent,
he said, and drew his thumb across his gorget.
I made an oath to Tiamat.
Ballack nodded, uncaring at the moment.
Something tells me you're going to get your chance.
A kick in his back sent Ballack sprawling onto his chest. They did the same to Vorda too. Ballack watched sideways as his face was pressed into the ground under an orc's boot. Rough hands rubbed his shoulders and arms. He felt a savage tug on the chain linking his wrists and ankles as he was yanked to his feet.
Boys, down.
Ballack obeyed, but had seen everything he needed to already. 6 orcs, 3 apiece, 2 minders on each shoulder for both of him and Vorda, another one on each of their chains, a pistol in the other hand. Closest to the tunnel mouth, Ballack was being led out in front.
You'll regret this, filth!
He heard Vorda spit, for which he got another beating. As the cudgels and fist rains heavy on the Templar, the orc clutching Ballack's chain decided to shove the business end of his pistol under the Malevolent's chin. It forced Ballack's chin up, but he still kept his eyes on the beast. It was a little shorter than Malevolent, and almost as broad without armour. Tough, but not monstrous.
You hate him, eh? Want to kill him?
The orc paused to twist the muzzle of the pistol into Ballack's gullet. He could hear Vorda's grunts of pain and the hard smack of clubs hitting his body. Ballack met the greenskin's squinty porcine eyes and gave a slight nod. Not as much as I want to kill you, you stinking swine. The orc held Ballack's gaze a little longer, as if gauging the truth of his response, and then laughed. Half grunt, half squeal, it made Ballack want to wrench the cleaver hanging from the orc's belly and bury it in the beast's ugly skull. Instead, he smiled. And he really wants to kill me, he said, struggling to eke the words out with the pistol jammed in his throat. The orc's humour quickly faded, at the same time as the others stopped beating Vorda. Its sharp eyes betrayed a savage intelligence.
You're gonna get a charge, warrior.
It promised.
Both of yous.
They were dragged into a shallow basin of rock creek, overlooked on 3 sides by deep ledges filled with cackling, rowdy greenskins. They awaited a spectacle. Black had a good idea what that would be. He was led into the rock creek sink, to the guttural jeers of orcs and the whining hooting of the lesser greenskins, known as Gretchen. All work on the tunnel had been ceased as the labourers were afforded a little sport. It fed off the dry sink, only partially dug, jammed with explosives. The damp would foul some of the fuses. but there was so much that Ballack could see through a grated porthole in the sink wall that it wouldn't matter. Once the Orc miners had him in position, he was beaten as the chains were removed from all but one wrist, and then attached to an iron ring bolt into the rockcrete floor. They did the same to Vorda, who looked wary after a second battering from the Orc cudgels. The Templar gazed contemptuously, first at Ballack, then the greenskins around the sink, until it came back to Ballack again.
They'll have us fight to the death, Vorda. You and me. Then they'll kill who survives. Probably eat us both.
Each chain was held taut, so neither gladiator could attack until the appointed moment. Ballack thought that just as well, given the Templars' mood.
So long as you die first by my hand, I can live with that. Vengeance makes you short-sighted, brother.
Vorda sneered.
You are not my brother.
Oi. Run.
A deep, guttural voice bellowed above the clamouring greenskins.
And aid Arga.
The rowdy mob quietened down, responding to the Orc obviously in charge. Arguk sat on a slab of rock, a savage king on his throne, his subjects arrayed before him. Ballack had to turn to see the Orc, but both he and Vorda watched the beast as he spoke. Arguk was bigger than the rest, but this was not unusual for greenskins who valued strength above all else. He had one hobnail boot perched on a crate, using it like a footstool. Ballack saw the glint of blades and a bolter stock. This was where the greenskins had put their weapons.
You scum are gonna fight to the death.
Arguk's declaration was met with roars of approval from the mob.
Hand to hand.
The roaring intensified,
He has us under his boot, Templar.
said Ballack, having seen enough of the Orc King.
Under his boot.
Vorda's anger blinded him to what Ballack was trying to tell him. He only saw as far as his desire for vengeance.
Enough words, Malevolent.
His fists were already clenched. He'll come at me like a freight hauler, thought Ballack.
Ho ho ho.
Agrok's deep belly laugh mocked every shred of honour. Yeah, you're gonna give us a good fight. To the death. The greenskins bellowed in unison. Both chains were slacked off. Vorda's charged. Ballack let him, bringing up his knee into the Templar's stomach as he tried to tackle him around the waist. Vorda put such ferocity into the charge that Ballack was heaved off his feet anyway. He threw a punch and felt it strike cheekbone. A second blow got hooked by Vorda's forearm, and Ballack had a flash of white-hot pain as the Templar's forehead connected with his chin. Stunned, he scrambled back, getting to his feet and spitting out blood. He eyed the Templar, trying to shut out the crushing noise coming from the greenskins above. One of the beasts threw a Gretchen into Vorda's back. It stalled the Templar's next attack, but only as long as it took him to grab the shrieking little greenskin. To grab the shrieking little wretch and snap its neck. That drew a welter of cruel and raucous laughter. The din increased. Vorda came at him again, Ballack letting him take the initiative. He ducked a heavy punch, then blocked an overhand, but took one in the gut. Like a pugilist, Ballack went in close and pinned Vorda's arm, trapping him in a bear hug.
Afraid to die?
The Templar hissed, his spittle hitting Ballack's cheek as they were so close. He struggled, but Ballack held him. The pain in his wounded side was immense, but he held him.
There is no honour in this,
he said, gritting his teeth with the effort of containing the Templar. Above, the greenskins were getting restless for more blood.
If it's all I have left, I'll take it. As entertainment for this filth? I know I'm better than that, so you must be.
For a moment, Vorda stopped struggling.
How?
Ballack grinned through the barricade of his teeth.
Make them angry, get our guns from under the chieftain's boot. If you betray me,
Vorda warned.
then we're dead anyway.
They broke apart, Ballack making a show of thrusting the Templar back. Agrat had got to his feet. His voice rose above the clamour.
My lads ain't happy. They want spleen, and so do I.
The orc turned to one of the minders.
Give 'em each a blade.
2 rough-looking blades were tossed into the pit, ringing as they hit the ground. A crude axe and rusty meat cleaver. The orcs wanted them to literally butcher one another. Ballack took the axe, as it was closest. The fight had shifted, so they were side onto Agrak's throne. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the big orc was still on his feet, trying to rabble-rouse the others and prevent a riot. Some of the orcs carried pistols, but none of them were currently armed. They were too engrossed in the fight, forgetting the nature of their prey. Vorda had the cleaver. He gave it a few practice swings. Ballack saw some of the greenskins emulating him with imagined blades of their own. Their mocking laughter boiled his blood.
Come on then,
He whispered, and hoped the Templar upheld his side of the bargain. Vorda ran at him, blade held high. The Templar was a better swordsman than he. It left him exposed to a counter, or it could have been a feint. Ballack had 3 short breaths to decide. The axe felt heavy in his grip. Despite its crudity, it could have caused some serious damage. They'll kill who survives. Probably eat us both. Ballack remembered his own words. Time to find out if he believed them. Vorda came in hard and swinging. Ballack crouched down onto his knees with the axe held flat against the ground. He felt the pressure on his back as Vorda used it to vault. Rising, Ballack heard Agrak's roar of anger emerge into the desperate pain scream. The orc had a cleaver jutting from his neck, rammed there by a vengeful Templar. It took only a few seconds for the orcs to realise what had happened. Slow-witted, despite their ostensible intelligence. One of the miners dropped into the pit, reaching for a club instead of a gun. Foolish. Ballack seized its arms, halting the cudgel in mid-swing, and turned the orc into ablative armour. As the solid shot soared down into the pit, the miner shuddered as its back was threaded with slugs. Blood coughed up all over Ballack's chest, and then he dropped the beast, which was all but shredded anyway. Vorda had his blade and pistol, another dead orc at his feet. Agrak was a cold corpse, near decapitated and slumped against his throne. About to engage another greenskin, he shouted,
take up your arms, Malevolent!
A bolt pistol landed in the pit, and Ballack swept it up. He took aim through the granite porthole, sighting the furthest barrel of fuel in the half-dug tunnel, and fired. The explosion was immense. The earth shook, chunks of rubble and cataracts of dust spilling from the tunnel roof. A heartbeat lapsed after the initial incendiary roar, before giving birth to a firestorm that surged out the excavated tunnel and into the area. Vorda leapt off the ledge and thrust his body against the wall that faced the blast. Ballack was already hunkered down and gave him a knowing wink as their eyes met. Most of the greenskins were too slow. Ballack saw several caught in the blast, hanging in the air as they tried too late to jump to safety, their bodies instantly aflame and seared black. Flung corpses soared over Ballack's head, furiously catapulted aloft as a tongue of fire speared through the porthole like a heavy flamer. Crisp, burning greenskin meat turned the air inside the pit rancid. Smoke choked everything. An orc staggered through the grey cloud, lunging wildly. Vorda left the wall and cut it down. Two-handed, shoulder to hip, he impaled a second one, piercing its sternum. A deafening pistol burst killed the other, flooding the smoke haze with muzzle flare as Ballack did his part. Between them, they accounted for 12 greenskins who had survived the explosion. After Ballack finished the last, snapping the Gretchen's neck with a savage twist of his boot, the Malevolent and Templar faced one another across a killing field. "You fought well," said Vorda, as the smoke began to dissipate.
That was an honourable deed, for us to join swords instead of lock them. I don't know if I would have had enough temperance to do that.
Ballack gave a hollow laugh.
Does this mean you don't want to kill me anymore?
He felt raw, and hardly in the mood for another fight. Certainly not one against a Black Templar. If he had to, he would. Vorda had kicked the crate into the pit, scattering their weapons. Ballack's chainsword was close. He walked over to it slowly, grasped the hilt, and felt some of his strength return. Vorda hadn't answered, and when Ballack looked up to find out why, he saw the Templar bent over Tiamat's blade. It would be so easy. Thumb the ignition, stab him through the back. He was wounded. He'd be slow. Ballack raised the chainsword, his thumb over the stud. He let it fall. Enough treachery for one day, he thought. Agrek's corpse was roasting somewhere above. He'd take the orc's tusks and give them to Castor, show he still had teeth. Ballack smiled at that, turning his back on Vorda to go and claim his trophy. In the crucible of battle, all grievances are forgotten.
Until we meet again, bro.
The words stuck in Ballack's throat. At the same time, Vorda drove Tiamat's blade into his back. It pierced Ballack's chest, tearing through the Malevolent's heart.
No, brother.
Vorda hissed into his ear, turning the hilt so it churned Ballack's organs.
Now, you stabbed me in the back.
Ballack could barely breathe, let alone speak.
Sacrificing honor, but avenging Tiamat,
said Vorda, pushing the blade deeper.
Was it worth it?
Ballack croaked, spitting up flecks of blood.
Never, but at least you'll be dead.
The grains had almost run out for Ballack, but he smiled through his red-rimmed teeth as he uttered his final words.
Shame. Think I'm beginning to like you, Templar.
Ballack laughed, spewing up more blood, and then hung on Tiamat's sword until Vorda wrenched it loose and left him amongst the other mouldering dead.